Marcus Stone adjusted his platinum watch and quickened his pace through the bustling airport terminal. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from his assistant about the Tokyo merger deal that could add another 50 million to his tech empire's valuation. Gate 23B, Gate 23B, he muttered, scanning the departure boards while juggling his leather briefcase and coffee. The overhead announcements blurred into white noise as he focused solely on reaching his flight. He handed his boarding pass to the attendant without looking up, still typing emails on his phone. "Thank you, Mr. Stone. Enjoy your flight to Denver. Denver." Marcus's head snapped up. "No, this should be Tokyo." The attendant smiled apologetically. "Sir, this is Flight 447 to Denver. Your gate for Tokyo is 32A, about 10 gates down." Marcus cursed under his breath. The Tokyo flight was probably boarding already. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eyes. Small boy sitting in the third row. Coloring intently in a sketchbook, the child had tousled brown hair, bright green eyes, and a concentrated expression that made Marcus's chest tighten painfully. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. James. The name escaped as barely a whisper. The boy looked up, revealing a face that could have been Marcus's own son at age 8. The same dimpled chin, the same way of tilting his head when curious. Marcus's briefcase slipped from his suddenly numb fingers. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" A warm voice interrupted his shock. Marcus turned to see a woman in her early 30s, with auburn hair and concerned brown eyes. She moved protectively closer to the boy. "I'm sorry, I just... your son. He looks... Marcus struggled to find words. "That wouldn't sound insane." "Oliver, come here, sweetheart," the woman said gently, extending her hand to the boy. "Is this man bothering you?" "No, Mama." "He just looks sad," Oliver replied with the honest observation only children possess. "Are you okay, mister?" Marcus knelt down to Oliver's eye level, his hands trembling slightly. "What's your name, son?" "Oliver. Bennett. I'm 8 3/4. Mama says that's almost 9. "Sir, I need to ask you to return to your seat." A flight attendant approached. "We're preparing for takeoff." Marcus looked between the concerned flight attendant, the protective mother, and the boy who looked exactly like his lost son, James. 5 years ago, James had vanished during a camping trip, despite extensive searches, and investigations that had consumed Marcus's life and fortune. "I'm Grace Bennett," the woman said carefully, "and you are?" "Marcus Stone." He stood slowly, still staring at Oliver. "I know this sounds crazy, but your son looks exactly like..."
"Someone very important to me."
Grace's expression softened. "Slightly. Children often remind us of people we love. But I need you to understand that Oliver is my son, and I'm very protective of him, of course. I'm sorry if I frightened you both." Marcus retrieved his briefcase, his mind racing. "I was supposed to be on a different flight anyway." "The Tokyo flight," Oliver piped up. "That sounds exciting. You going on an adventure?" Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "Something like that." Captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to air traffic control delays, we'll have a longer flight time than expected. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened." Marcus glanced toward the front of the plane, then back at Oliver and Grace. Something deep in his gut told him that missing his Tokyo flight might not have been an accident. "Mama Ken, the sad man. Sit with us." "He looks lonely," Oliver whispered loudly. Grace hesitated, studying Marcus's face. "Are you really planning to switch flights?" Marcus looked at Oliver's hopeful expression and Grace's cautious kindness. The Tokyo deal suddenly seemed less important than the inexplicable pull he felt toward this small family. "Actually," he said, settling into his seat, "maybe Denver was exactly where I was supposed to go." 2 hours into the flight, turbulence began rattling the cabin. Marcus had moved to the seat across the aisle from Grace and Oliver, close enough to observe the remarkable resemblance, but respectful of Grace's protective boundaries. "Mama, why is the plane shaking?" Oliver pressed closer to Grace, his coloring. "Book forgotten. Just some bumpy air, sweetie, like driving over a rocky road," Grace soothed. though Marcus noticed her knuckles were white as she gripped the armrest. The captain's voice cut through the cabin noise. Folks, we're encountering severe weather ahead. For safety reasons, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Mountain View, Colorado. We apologize for the inconvenience. Marcus leaned across the aisle. Is everything all right? You look worried. Grace bit her lip. My father, he's in the hospital in Denver. I was hoping to see him tonight. Papa Henry is sick, Oliver added solemnly. He has a bad cough that won't go away. As the plane descended through thick storm clouds, Marcus found himself genuinely concerned for these strangers, who somehow felt familiar. The landing was rough, and Oliver's small hand instinctively reached across the aisle toward Marcus during the worst bumps. You're very brave, Marcus told him, as they taxied toward the small mountain airport terminal. Mama says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs doing anyway. The terminal was cramped and outdated, with only a few dozen passengers from their diverted flight milling about anxiously. The desk agent's announcement confirmed everyone's fears. All flights are grounded until the storm system passes. Earliest departure will be tomorrow afternoon, possibly later. Grace sank into a plastic chair. Oliver curled up beside her. The car rental places are all closed, she said quietly, pulling out her phone, and the hotels are booked solid with stranded passengers. Marcus overheard her conversation with the hospital. Her father's condition was worsening, and she was running low on the funds she'd saved for this emergency trip. Excuse me, Marcus. Approached carefully. I couldn't help but overhear. I have a rental car reserved. They held it because of my platinum status. You're welcome to share it. Grace looked up suspiciously. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Honestly, I'm not sure. But your son reminds me of someone special. And you seem like good people who could use a break. Oliver tugged on Grace's sleeve. Mama, he's the sad man from the plane. Maybe helping us will make him less sad. Grace studied Marcus's face for a long moment. You're not some kind of creep, are you? Because I have pepper spray and zero tolerance for. I understand your caution. Here's my driver's license, my business card, references from my company. Marcus pulled out his wallet. You can call anyone. I just want to help. An hour later, they were driving through winding mountain roads in Marcus's rented SUV. Oliver chatted happily from the back seat about everything from dinosaurs to his favorite pizza toppings, while Grace remained politely distant but gradually warmer. So what do you do, Marcus? Grace asked, as they navigated through the storm. I run a tech company. It's mostly software development, some hardware. It's complicated and not very interesting. Everything's interesting if you explain it right. Oliver chimed in. Mama always says that. Your mama sounds very wise. Grace glanced at him sideways. And what about your family? Wife? Kids? Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel. I had a son. He'd be about Oliver's age now. And Grace's voice softened. He disappeared 5 years ago during a camping trip. We never found him. Car fell silent except for the rain drumming against the windows. Oliver leaned forward between the seats. That's why you're sad, he said matter-of-factly. You miss your little boy. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice.
Maybe he's on an adventure and will come home soon,
Oliver suggested hopefully. Maybe, Marcus managed. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot in Denver, Marcus realized something had shifted during their journey through the storm. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than grief and guilt. Sitting in this car with Grace and Oliver, he felt the possibility of hope. The next morning, Marcus woke up in the hospital waiting room where he'd fallen asleep in an uncomfortable chair. Grace sat nearby, looking exhausted but relieved. Your father? He asked, stretching his stiff neck. Better. The antibiotics are working. She handed him a cup of coffee. You didn't have to stay all night? Where else would I go? Besides, Oliver made me promise to help with his dinosaur puzzle. As if summoned, Oliver appeared around the corner carrying a large puzzle box and grinning. Marcus, Mama said Papa Henry wants to meet you. In the hospital room, Marcus met Henry Carter, retired teacher with kind eyes and a persistent cough. Despite his illness, Henry was sharp and observant. So you're the businessman who helped my girls, Henry said, studying Marcus carefully. Girls? Marcus glanced at Grace. Grace is like a daughter to me. Her father and I taught at the same school for 30 years. Henry's expression grew serious. She's been through enough heartbreak for 3 lifetimes. I hope your intentions are honorable, Grandpa Henry. Marcus is helping us because Oliver reminds him of his lost little boy, Oliver announced, with typical 8-year-old directness. Henry's weathered face softened. Ah, that explains the sadness in your eyes. Over the next 2 days, while flights remained grounded, Marcus found himself integrated into their small family routine. He helped Oliver with homework at the hospital cafeteria, brought Grace decent coffee from across the street, and sat with Henry when Grace needed to rest. You know, Henry said during one of their conversations, Grace's husband died in a car accident 3 years ago. She's been raising Oliver alone, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She mentioned she was a teacher, art teacher at the elementary school, and she waitresses on weekends. Brilliant woman, but life's dealt her some tough cards. That evening, Marcus took Grace and Oliver to dinner at a family restaurant Henry recommended. Watching Grace laugh at Oliver's silly jokes and seeing the boys' uninhibited joy at simple pleasures like chocolate milkshakes, Marcus felt something inside him begin to thaw. Can I ask you something personal? Grace said after Oliver went to play in the restaurant's small arcade. Of course. When your son disappeared, what happened? Marcus took a shaky breath. We were camping in Yellowstone. James was exploring near our campsite while I set up the tent. When I looked up, he was gone. We searched for days, weeks. The Park Service, FBI volunteers, everyone helped. It's like he vanished into thin air. I'm so sorry. The worst part is not knowing. Wondering if he's scared, if he's hungry, if he remembers us. Marcus's voice cracked. My wife couldn't handle the uncertainty. She blamed me. And honestly, she was right. I should have been watching him more carefully. Grace reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. You can't blame yourself for every moment you're not watching. Children disappear in seconds. Doesn't make you a bad parent. Tell that to my ex-wife. Tell that to the therapist. Tell that to the voice in my head at 3 a.m. Oliver returned then, sliding into the booth beside Marcus with natural ease. Mama. Marcus looked sad again. Should we tell him a joke? That might help. Grace smiled. Okay. Don't dinosaurs ever pay their taxes? I don't know why, Marcus asked, grateful for the distraction. Because they're extinct? Oliver dissolved into giggles at his own joke. Despite everything, Marcus found himself really laughing for the first time since James disappeared. Later that night, back at the modest motel where they'd finally found rooms, Marcus stood on the balcony looking at the mountains. His phone buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from his assistant about the delayed Tokyo meeting. But for once he didn't care. Grace appeared on the adjacent balcony. Can't sleep? Too much to think about. He gestured toward the mountains. It's beautiful here. Peaceful. Oliver's asleep. Finally. He's been talking nonstop about all the things he wants to show you tomorrow. Double quotes. Grace. Dot. I know this might sound strange, but these past few days with you and Oliver, it's the first time I've felt alive since James disappeared. She was quiet for a moment. You're a good man, Marcus Stone. Broken, maybe, but good. Oliver sees that. Children have excellent instincts about people. What do you see? Grace considered carefully. I see someone who's forgotten that healing doesn't mean forgetting. Someone who's been carrying guilt that isn't entirely his to carry. As she turned to go inside, Marcus called softly, Grace, thank you for letting me into your lives, even temporarily. Maybe it wasn't temporary, she said quietly. Maybe some people come into our lives exactly when we need them most. On their 3rd day in Denver, while Henry was being discharged from the hospital, Marcus received a call that changed everything. Mr. Stone? This is Detective Rivera from the Park Service. You asked us to contact you if we ever found any new leads on your son's case. Marcus's blood turned cold.
What did
You find we reopened several cold cases using new DNA technology? Your son's case came up with an interesting connection. Can you tell me, do you have any relatives named Bennett, specifically a brother? Marcus sank into a hospital corridor chair, his mind reeling. Ah, yes. I had a brother, David. We haven't spoken in 12 years. He was angry about our father's will, said the family cut him out unfairly. David Bennett married a woman named Lisa Carter in Colorado Springs 8 years ago. She died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving behind a son. The phone slipped from Marcus's suddenly nerveless fingers. Grace, returning from Henry's room, rushed over. Marcus, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. He stared at her with new understanding. Carter. Your last name was Carter before you married. Yes. How did you? Grace stopped, her face paling. Marcus, you're scaring me, your husband. Was his name David Bennett? Grace sat down heavily in the chair beside him. Yes. How could you possibly know that? Because David Bennett was my brother. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Oliver chose that moment to bound out of Henry's room, chattering excitedly about going home. Mama, Marcus. Papa Henry says we can all have lunch at Oliver stopped, sensing the tension. What's wrong? Why do you both look funny? Grace pulled Oliver close to her, her voice shaking. Sweetheart, remember how I told you Daddy had a brother he didn't talk to anymore? Oliver nodded solemnly. This is Daddy's brother. This is your Uncle Marcus. Oliver looked back and forth between them, processing this information with 8-year-old logic. So that's why I look like his little boy? 'Cause we're family? Partly, yes, Marcus managed, his throat tight. But Mama, if Marcus is Daddy's brother, why didn't Daddy want to talk to him? Grace and Marcus exchanged pained glances. Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements that get too big to fix, Grace said carefully. That evening, after Henry was settled at home, Grace and Marcus sat on her small apartment balcony, while Oliver played inside. The Denver skyline stretched before them, but neither really saw it. I want you to know, Grace said quietly, David never told me much about his family. Just that his father had favored his older brother and left him almost nothing in the will. Our father was old-fashioned. He believed the eldest son should inherit the business. I tried to give David his fair share, but he was too proud to accept what he saw as charity. He was stubborn about money, said he'd rather make his own way than take handouts. And I was too proud to keep trying. I let him walk away. Marcus's voice was heavy with regret. If I'd known about you, about Oliver, ... David made his choice. We both did what we thought was right at the time. They sat in silence, processing the weight of years of misconnections and family wounds that had shaped their paths to this moment. Marcus, Grace said finally, there's something else. The detective mentioned DNA technology and reopened cases. What aren't you telling me? Marcus took a deep breath. They're running new tests on evidence from James's disappearance, looking for family connections that might help locate him. Now they know about Oliver. Yes. They want to meet with us tomorrow, all of us. Grace closed her eyes. Oliver's been through so much already. Losing his father, struggling financially, moving twice this year, ... I know. I won't do anything to disrupt his life. But Grace, what if this connection somehow helps us find James? What if my nephew is the key to finding my son? Grace looked through the sliding door at Oliver, who was building an elaborate Lego castle on the living room floor. What if finding James means losing the life we've built? What if this family reunion tears apart the only family Oliver's ever known? Marcus followed her gaze to the boy who looked so much like his lost son. Then we'll face that together, as family should have. Done 12 years ago? 6 weeks later, Marcus stood in the arrival terminal of Denver International Airport, his heart pounding as passengers streamed through the gate. Detective Rivera had called that morning with news that seemed impossible. James had been found. Grace and Oliver waited beside him, their own emotions a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The past month had been a whirlwind of DNA tests, family meetings, and slowly rebuilding connections that should never have been broken. There, Detective Rivera pointed toward the gate. The family that found him is bringing him back. Marcus saw him before the detective finished speaking. A 13-year-old boy with tousled brown hair and familiar green eyes, walking hesitantly beside a middle-aged couple who had clearly loved and cared for him for 5 years. James? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. The boy stopped, studying. Marcus's face with the same concentrated expression Oliver made when solving puzzles. Are you... Are you my dad? Yes, son, I'm your dad. The reunion was nothing like Marcus had imagined during 5 years of desperate hoping. James was cautious, polite, but essentially a stranger. He'd been found by the Hendersons after wandering into their remote cabin property, confused and unable to remember how he'd gotten there. They'd assumed he was abandoned and had raised him as their own son, loving him deeply but never quite managing to legally adopt him due to bureaucratic complications. We would have contacted authorities earlier, Mrs. Henderson explained tearfully, but Jamie couldn't remember his last name or where he came from. Head injury, the doctor said. And he seemed so traumatized that we didn't want to push. Marcus watched James, who now called himself Jamie, interact awkwardly with this room full of relatives and strangers. The boy kept glancing toward Oliver, who was studying his cousin with fascination. You really look like me, Oliver said finally. Breaking the tense silence, yeah, Jamie replied. It's weird, but kind of cool. Want to see my dinosaur collection? Uncle Marcus bought me some new ones. Uncle Marcus? Oliver looked confused. That's your dad, so he's my uncle. And you're my cousin. Mama explained it all with a drawing. For the first time since arriving, Jamie smiled, a real smile that transformed his cautious features into something Marcus remembered from years ago. Over the following days, as lawyers worked out custody arrangements and therapists helped navigate the complex emotional landscape, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. I'm not taking him back to San Francisco, he announced during a family meeting at Grace's apartment. But Marcus, Grace said carefully, he's your son. Your life is there. Your business, my business, nearly destroyed my marriage and cost me my son once already. I won't make that mistake twice. Marcus looked at James, who was teaching Oliver to play chess at the kitchen table. Jamie's home is here now, as friends, a school he likes, and family he's just getting to know. I'm not going to uproot him again. So what are you saying? Detective Rivera asked. I'm saying I'm moving to Denver. I can run my company from anywhere. What I can't do from anywhere is be the father and brother and uncle I should have been. All along, James looked up from the chessboard. You'd really move here? For me? For all of us? If you'll have me. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the backyard of the house he'd bought just 3 blocks from Grace's apartment. Watching his son and nephew splash in the swimming pool he'd installed specifically for them, Grace sat beside him in a lawn chair, grading art projects from her students. Any regrets about leaving California? She asked, not looking up from her papers. Only that it took me 5 years and a missed flight to find my way home. Home? Marcus gestured toward the boys, who were now arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to use the diving board. Wherever they are, that's home. Grace set down her grading and looked at him seriously. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Always. When you look at Oliver, do you still see James? Are you here because you found your son, or because you found us? Marcus considered the question carefully. The first day on the plane? Yes, I saw James. But now when I look at Oliver, I see Oliver. I see a brilliant, funny, kind boy who taught me how to laugh again. I see my nephew, who I love for exactly who he is. And when you look at me, when I look at you, Grace Bennett, I see the woman who saved my life by letting me into yours. I see someone I want to build a future with, not as a replacement for the past, but as something entirely new. Oliver climbed out of the pool and ran over, dripping wet and grinning. Marcus, Jamie says he remembers camping now. He wants to go on a trip with all of us this summer. Marcus looked at James, who was nodding enthusiastically from the pool. A camping trip sounds perfect. Out. What do you think, Mama Grace? Grace smiled, using the nickname the boys had started calling her. I think this family is ready for any adventure. The sun set over their backyard full of laughter and splashing and the comfortable chaos of family life. Marcus realized that sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never plan to visit. Sometimes getting lost is just another way of finding your way home. The boy who looked exactly like his lost son had led him not just to James, but to a family he never knew he needed, a future he never imagined he deserved. In the end, boarding the wrong plane had been the rightest thing he'd ever done.